Hey, it's Crafty here. How you going? Do you ever find yourself in a situation where you want to perform some sort of music and you're not comfortable in the same way that you are at home? Well, we're going to get into the reasons why, so let's do it. Okay, so I was hanging with the Rainbow Vox Choir girls. Shout out to them. How you going? We do that once a week and it's usually a really good singing session. And so a couple of the girls had a question. They said, so when I'm at home, I'm pretty comfortable singing, but then as soon as I get into this rehearsing environment, then all of a sudden I get nervous and I can't hit the high notes like I usually would be able to. And so I tried to answer their question really fast. And so what I came up with on the spot was that you've got two different psychological elements that are at play. You've got one, on one hand, you've got the level of enthusiasm that you have as a human being. And then on the other side, you've got the level of perfection that you want to be executing. And it's really hard to try and keep and maintain a high level of both at the same time. If you're trying to execute perfectly, well then, that's a really tall order. And so the amount of enthusiasm that you might have will potentially diminish because you're trying so hard to be perfect that you sort of tense up and get really nervous.
Okay, Hal, this is your audience. Give them a little blast of Hamlet, dear boy. Come on, Howard. Show them what you're made of. Use the skills I've taught you. Howard? Oh, dear. This is the worst case of chokes I've ever laid my eyes on.
So the enthusiasm that you have just diminishes. Whereas on the other hand, if you're so enthusiastic, you've got such a high level of enthusiasm, and then what will come out potentially may not be perfect because you're just going for it that hard that you don't have any sort of sense of control. Now it's really hard to maintain that level of both enthusiasm and perfection. We are human beings. We're not perfect. So we can't expect to be perfect all the time. If you give yourself that level of perfection that you want to be achieving, well then it's nice to want to achieve greatness. But if you're being that hard on yourself, well then you're going to be closing yourself off to the potential opportunities that you could have if you just kind of let yourself go. So I've had many experiences with this subject that I can think of, but in regards to singing, I can think of many a time where I've been really concerned about not achieving the high note that I want to achieve when I'm singing. Ah! Yeah, maybe not that particular one. That was weird because I just sort of let it out, right? But if I'm trying really hard to be very precise, well then what will usually happen with me is I'll kind of tense my jaw.
Lorraine, we're going to have to cut you off. We're getting some kind of grinding noise on the track.
And having too much of a tense sensation that kind of gives me not the desired effect, because what will happen is being that tense, then I can't actually achieve the high pitch. If I do achieve the high pitch, well then it might be constricted. Constricting your vocal cords is where you have that ah kind of sound, and you don't want that.
No, God! No, God, please, no! 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 No!
So a great example that I can remember where I had basically the perfect blend of both was actually playing golf years ago with my late grandpa's golf clubs that were kind of cheap golf clubs. And bear with me, I know this hasn't got to do with music, but basically I would swing with my grandpa's golf clubs and the ball wouldn't really go exactly where I wanted it to go.
Son of a bitch, Paul, why didn't you just go home? That's your home! Are you too good for your home? Answer me!
So when it did work out, I'd have to think, wow, well, why did that work that time and not the other times? And so there was this one day where I kind of had all of the stars aligned. So picture yourself, you're on a fairway and you're looking out into the distance and you want your ball to go as far as it could possibly go. So I thought to myself, if I am so tense in my hands, well then that's not going to make for a good golf shot. But if I just go, I don't care, then the ball could just go anywhere. So it kind of occurred to me that what I need to do is have a super amount of enthusiasm while still clinging on for dear life with the club. And so then, you never guess what happened. So I did a swing, and as I was swinging, I remember thinking, try as hard as you can, yet don't tense up.
Okay, I do. Pressure's on. Don't choke, don't choke, don't choke, don't choke.
It's a very confusing feeling, but thankfully, both of those things managed to work out because I smashed the ball, it went exactly where I wanted it to go, and I had that feeling of like, right, so why did that work? And then years later, as I'm talking right now, I'm realizing, well, what it was is that I had the right blend of both. If I had a little bit too much enthusiasm, then I wouldn't have had that sense of control. The ball wouldn't have gone straight. If I had a little bit too much perfection, what would have happened was I would have got too tense and the ball wouldn't have been able to have been struck with the right amount of velocity. So musically, how can you do that? We're not playing golf when we're singing, or at least you're probably not. So what I want you to do is I want you to think, what is your level of enthusiasm that you have for your music, whatever you're working on right now, and what is your level of perfection that you want? So pause the video right now and just have a think. Take 10 seconds if you need, take a minute. Really try and think, what number out of 10 would you give yourself for each of those columns? All right, do it right now. Okay, so we've got those numbers. For me, I like to think of myself as somebody with a lot of enthusiasm, and at times I have a lot of perfection as well. So it's just a matter of being really conscious of when you find yourself that if you're at home and you're in your comfortable place, well then think, well, what number am I now? And then what level of perfection is actually being executed? If you're practicing singing at home and you're just super going for it, well then what level of sound is coming out? Is it a good sound? Because sometimes when you're really going for it, you don't have enough control over what you're actually doing. And then when you're in a situation and you're feeling, oh, I'm a bit nervous, there's other people around, think to yourself, all right, well, what's my number now of enthusiasm? Because if you have such a high level of perfection, you're going to be too tense, you're going to be closed in. And we don't want that. You want to be able to have extra levels of enthusiasm that you do when you're in your comfortable space. So just by monitoring those numbers, that should be help enough, but I'll talk to you about some other things that might give you some extra food for thought. So a great example of this enthusiasm versus perfection stuff from my life that I can think of with a story is that back in the day, I was a young up-and-coming guitarist where I was playing around in local bands in South Australia, and an international touring band was coming through called Neo, and now they have the at the start of their name, so they're the Neo these days. Whoa. Anyway, back in the day, they had met me and said, we're going to be coming back to South Australia and we need a drummer to fill in for us. Do you know anyone that could fill in? And I was thinking to myself, well, I'll just tell them that if they're desperate, they can have me. And I do a lot of things like that because a lot of the time, I guess I don't think about the consequences because I have a lot of enthusiasm, right? But in this situation, what ended up happening, easy way to put it is that they were desperate. So I got an opportunity to basically have my first ever live gigs playing drums. So my level of enthusiasm then all of a sudden had to be really solid because my level of perfection, at least to their level, wasn't going to be able to be reciprocated. And so I ended up performing with them, and I think it went okay. By today's standards of the drum skill level that I have now is kind of chalk and cheese, right? So, but we all have to start somewhere, and we all need to have steps that we climb up in order to be able to achieve the things that we want to in life. And so if I just decided, well, I'm not going to have this level of perfection that an interstate touring band needs and not actually just take the opportunity, well then I don't know how my drumming would have come along. What actually ended up happening was the drummer for the actual band in Darwin, he left the band, and so over a year later they ring me up and say, hey, do you want to move to Darwin and be our drummer? And they knew that I was a guitarist first, not a drummer, but they still asked me, and I asked them why, and they just liked me as a person. And I guess they thought with the level of enthusiasm that I had, that I would improve a lot. And funnily enough, that's actually what happened, because I really got into the drums and I improved out of sight, and I got to tour around Australia with the band, which at that point I hadn't done yet as a guitarist. So in your life, if you see that there's a potential opportunity for yourself, don't necessarily say no straight away if you don't think that you've got the level of perfection that you need to execute, because you may miss out on a huge opportunity that may have extra things at the end of the rainbow that you can't foresee yet. But in my life, there's many times as well where I have a level of perfection that I want to be executing. And so, for instance, even just with these YouTube videos, that I'd like it to be at a certain level of quality. For years, I avoided doing anything online whatsoever because I just didn't want to add to the crap. But yeah, there's many times where I stop myself from either starting to shoot something or I start to edit, and then I think to myself, I don't have the amount of time that I need in order to be able to get out the level of editing that I want it to be. And then I learnt this saying that's kind of changed my life. Done is better than perfect. It's actually not really that much of a crazy saying, but when you really listen to it and really understand that actually just getting something done, it doesn't need to be perfect. Would you rather have something that doesn't ever get finished, for instance, like a lot of unfinished projects that I have? It's got to be. And the great analogy is that you've got somebody that's sitting by the pool reading a book, and the book is called Learn How to Swim. And they're learning all this great stuff by reading this book, except they're by the pool. They're not inside the pool. Like the other people that you kind of just get in the pool and you just kind of figure it out. And yeah, so just making sure that you just go for it. Worry about is it going to be perfect later is going to help you get out of that funk. You'll have an experience that will then be able to dictate, well, all right, was it the level that I wanted it to? And if it wasn't, you know what? Well, then that's the past. Worry about the future. If you keep stopping yourself from reaching those goals that you want to reach, well then, how are you going to ever reach them? Now that's a great segue into telling you about my Instagram Crafty Music Tips page. If you haven't followed it, then go do it right now. And by the way, it's the same content that gets uploaded to the Crafty Music Tips Facebook page. And there was a post recently that the motto was, success is merely just a series of failures. And that's completely the right mindset to have, because if you are there in a situation where you're clamming up and you're thinking, I'm not going to have the level of perfection that I want.
Danger, Will Robinson, danger!
Well, then just think of it as it's the journey, not the destination. Just before I go, what's been the number one thing that you've got out of this video? Leave a comment below, let me know. And follow the Crafty Music Tips Instagram and Facebook pages, and I'll see you very soon. Bye bye.